What will happen? Said little Toomey. Happen? The worst can happen. Peterson Sahib is a madman. Else, why should he go hunting with these wild devils? He may even require thee to be an elephant catcher, to sleep anywhere in these fever filled jungles, and at last to be trampled to death in the Kiddy. It is well that this nonsense ends safely. Next week the catching is over, and if all the planes are sent back to our stations, then we will march on smooth roads and forget all this hunting. But, son, I am angry that thou should meddle in the business that belongs to these dirty jungle folk. Kala Nag will obey none but me, so I must go with him. But he is only a fighting elephant, and he does not help to rope them. So I sit at my ease, as befits a mere hunter. Well, not a mere hunter, I say, and a man who gets a pension at the end of his service. Is the family of Toomey of the elephants to be trodden underfoot in the dirt of Kedar? Bad one, wicked one, worthless son. Go and wash Kala Nag and attend to his ears, and see that there are no thorns in his feet, or else Peterson Sahib will surely catch thee and make thee a wild hunter, a follower of elephants' foot tracks, a jungle bear. Oh, shame! Go! Little Toomey went off without saying a word, but he told Kala Nag all his grievances while he was examining his feet. No matter, said little Toomey, turning up the fringe of Kala Nag's huge right ear. They have said my name to Peterson Sahib, and perhaps, oh, who knows? That is a big thorn that I have just pulled out. The next few days were spent in getting the elephants together, in walking in the newly caught wild elephants up and down between a couple of tame ones to prevent them from giving too much trouble on the downward march to the plains, and in taking stock of the blankets and ropes and things that had been worn out or lost in the forest. Peterson Sahib came in on his clever she elephant. He had been paying off another camps among the hills, for the season was coming to an end, and there was a native clerk sitting in the table under a tree to pay the drivers their wages. As each man was paid, he went back to his elephant and joined the line that stood ready to start. The catchers and hunters and beaters, the men of the regular Kedar, who stayed in the jungle year in and year out, sat on the back of the elephants that belonged to Peterson Sahib's permanent force, or leaned against the trees with their guns across their arms, and made fun of the drivers who were going away, and laughed when the newly caught elephants broke the line and ran about. Big Toomey went to the clerk with little Toomey behind him, and Machuapa, the head tracker, said in an undertone to his friend of his, There goes one piece of good elephant stuff at least. 'Tis a pity to send that young jungle boy out in the plains. Now Peterson Sahib had ears all over him, as a man who must have listened to the most silent of all living things, the wild elephant. He turned back, and he was lying on his back, and said, What is that? I know not of a man among the plain drivers who had wit enough to rope a dead elephant. This is a man, not a man, but a boy. He went into the Kedar at the last drive, and threw Barmayo the rope there, when we were trying to get that young calf with the blotch on his shoulder away from his mother. Machuapa pointed at little Toomey, and Peterson Sahib looked, and little Toomey bowed to the earth. He threw a rope. He is smaller than a picket pin. Little one, what is thy name? Said Peterson Sahib. Little Toomey was too frightened to speak, but Kala Nag was behind him, and Toomey made a sign with his hand, and the elephant caught him up in his trunk and held him level with his forehead in front of the great Peterson Sahib. Then little Toomey covered his face with his hands, for he was only a child, and except where elephants were concerned, he was just as bashful as he could be. Oh, said Peterson Sahib, smiling underneath his moustache, and why did they teach that elephant that trick? Was it to help thee steal green corn from the roofs of the houses when the ears were put out to dry? Not green corn, protector of the poor. Melons, said little Toomey, and all of the men sitting about broke into a roar of laughter. Most of them had taught their elephants that trick when they were boys. Little Toomey was hanging 8 feet up in the air, and he wished very much that he were 8 feet underground. He is Toomey, my son Sahib, said Big Toomey, scowling. He is a very bad boy, and he will end in a jail, Sahib. Of that I have my doubts, said Peterson Sahib. A boy who can face a full Kedar at his age does not end in jails. See, little one, here are 4 annas to spend in sweet meats, because thou hast a little head under that great thatch of hair. In time, he may become a hunter too. Big Tumay scowled more than ever. Remember, though, that Kedars are not good for children to play in, Peterson Sahib went on. Must I never go there? Asked little Tumay with a big gasp. Yes, Peterson Sahib smiled again. When thou hast seen the elephants dance, that is the proper time. Come to me when thou hast seen the elephants dance, and then I will let you go into the Kedars. There was another roar of laughter, for that is an old joke among elephant catchers, and it means just never. There are great cleared flat places hidden away in the forests that are called the elephants' ballrooms, but even those are found by accident, and no man has ever seen the elephants dance. When a driver boasts of his skill and bravery, the others say, "And why did you see the elephants dance?" Kala Nag put little Tume down, and he bowed to the earth again, and went away with his father, and gave the silver 4 anna piece to his mother, who was nursing his baby brother, and they were all put on Kala Nag's back, and the line of grunting, squealing elephants rolled down the hill path to the plains. It was a lively march on account of the new elephants, who gave trouble at every ford, who needed coaxing or beating at every other minute. Big Tumay prodded Kala Nag spitefully, for he was very angry, but little Tumay was too happy to speak. Peterson Sahib had noticed him and given him money, so he felt as a private soldier would feel, as if he had been called out of the ranks and praised by his commander in chief. What did Peterson Sahib mean by the elephant dance? He said, at last, softly to his mother. Big Tumay heard him and grunted. You should never be one of those hill buffaloes of those trackers. That's what he meant. Oh, you in front. What is blocking the way? A driver, 2 or 3 elephants ahead, turned round angrily, crying, Bring up Kala Nag and knock this youngster of mine into good behaviour. Why should Peterson Sahib have chosen me to go down with you donkeys for the rice fields? Lay your beast alongside, Tumay, and let him prod with his tusks. By all the gods of the hills, these new elephants are possessed, or else they can smell their companions in the jungle. Kala Nag hit the new elephant in the ribs and knocked the wind out of him. As Big Tumay said, We have swept the hills of wild elephants at the last catch. It is only your carelessness in driving. Must I keep order along the whole line? Hear him, said the other driver. We have swept the hills. You are very wise, you plains people. Anyone but a mudhead who never saw the jungle would say that they know the drives are ended for the season. Therefore, all the wild elephants tonight will. But should I waste wisdom on a river turtle? What will they do? Little Tumay called out. Oh, little one, well, I will tell you that we do have a cool head. They will dance, and it behoves thy father, and who has swept all of the hills of all of the elephants, to double chain the pickets tonight. What talk is this? Said Big Tumay. For 40 years, father and son, we have tended elephants, and we have never heard such moonshine about dances. Yes, but a plainsman who lives in a hut knows the 4 walls of his hut. Well, thy elephants unshackled tonight and see what comes. As for their dancing, I have seen the place where. How many windings has the Dehag River? Here is another ford, and we must swim the calves. Stop still, you, behind there. And in this way, talking and wrangling and splashing through the rivers, they made their first march to a sort of receiving camp for the new elephants. But they lost their tempers long before they got there. Then the elephants were chained by their hind legs to their big stumps of pickets, and extra ropes were fitted to the new elephants, and the fodder was piled behind them. And the hill drivers went back to Peterson Sahib through the afternoon light, telling the plain drivers to be extra careful that night and laughing when the plains drivers asked for the reason. Little Tumay attended to the Kala Nag's supper, and as evening fell, wandered through the camp, unspeakably happy, in search of a tom-tom. When an Indian's child's heart is full, he does not run around and make noise in an irregular fashion. He sits down to a sort of revel all by himself, and little Tumay had been spoken to by Peterson Sahib. If he had not found what he wanted, I believe he would have burst. But the sweetmeat seller in the camp lent him a little tom-tom, a drum between the flat of the hand, and he sat down, cross-legged, before Kala Nag as the stars began to come out, the tom-tom in his lap, and he thumped and thumped and thumped, and the more he thought of the great honour that he had done to him, the more he thumped, all along among the elephant fodder. There were no tunes and no words, but the thumping made him happy. The new elephants strained at their ropes and squealed and trumpeted from time to time. He could hear his mother in the camp putting his small brother to sleep with an old song about the great god Shiv, who once told all the animals what they should eat. It's a very soothing lullaby. Little Toomay came in with a joyous tunk-a-tunk at the end of each verse, till he felt very sleepy and stretched himself on the fodder at Kala Nag's side. At last the elephants began to lie down one after another, as is their custom, till only Kala Nag at the right of the line was left standing up, and he rocked slowly from side to side, his ears put forward to listen to the night wind as it blew slowly across the hills. The air was full of the night noises that had taken together, make one big silence, the click of one bamboo stem against the other, the rustle of something alive in the undergrowth, the scratch and squawk of a half-waked bird, and the fall of of the water every so often. Little Toomay slept for some time, and when he waked, it was brilliant moonlight, and Kala Nag was still standing with his ears just listening. Little Toomay turned, rustling in the fodder, and watched the curve of his big back against half of the stars in heaven. And while he watched he heard, so far away that it sounded no more than a pinhole of noise, prickled through the stillness, the hoot toot of a wild elephant. All the elephants in the lines jumped up as if they had been shot, and their grunts at last waked the sleeping mahouts, and they came out and drove in the picket pegs with big mallets, and tightened this rope and knotted that till all was quiet. One new elephant had nearly grubbed up his picket, and Big Toomay took off Kala Nag's leg chain and shackled that elephant forefoot to hindfoot, but slipped a loop of grass string around Kala Nag's leg, and told him to remember that he was tied fast. He knew that he and his father and his grandfather had done the very same thing hundreds of times before. Kala Nag did not answer to the order by gurgling as he usually did. He stood still, looking out across the moonlight, his head a little raised and his ears spread like fans up to the great folds of the Garrow Hills. Look to him if he grows restless in the night, said Big Toomay to Little Toomay, and he went to the hut and slept. Little Toomay was just going to sleep too when he heard the core string snap with a little tang, and Kala Nag rolled out of his pickets as slowly and as silently as a cloud rolls out of the mouth of the valley. Little Toomay pattered after him, barefooted down the road in the moonlight, calling under his breath, Kala Nag, take me with you, O Kala Nag. The elephant turned without a sound, took 3 strides back to the boy in the moonlight, put down his trunk, swung him to his neck, and almost before Little Toomay had settled his knees, slipped into the forest. There was one blast of furious trumpeting from the lines, and the silence shut down on everything, and Kala Nag began to move. Sometimes a tuft of high grass washed along his sides as a wave washes along the sides of a ship, and sometimes a cluster of wild pepper vines would scrape along his back, or a bamboo would creak where his shoulder touched it. But between those times, he moved absolutely without any sound, drifting through the thick Garrow forest as though it had been smoke. He was going uphill, but though Little Toomay watched the stars in the rifts of the trees, he could not tell in what direction. Then Kala Nag reached the crest of the ascent and stopped for a minute, and Little Toomay could see the top of the trees lying all speckled and furry under the moonlight for miles and miles and miles, and the blue-white mist over the river in the hollow. Toomay leaned forward and looked, and how he felt that the forest was awake below him, awake and alive and crowded. A big brown fruit-eating bat brushed past his ear, a porcupine's quills rattled in the thicket, and in the darkness between the tree stems he heard a hogbear digging hard in the moist, warm earth and snuffing as it digged. Then the branches closed over his head, and Kala Nag began to go slowly down into the valley, not quietly this time, but as a runaway gun goes down a steep bank in one rush. The huge limbs moved as steadily as pistons, 8 feet to each side, and the wrinkled skin of the elbow points rustled. The undergrowth on either side of him ripped with a noise like torn canvas, and the saplings that he heaved right away, and then moved them right and left with his shoulders, sprang back again, and banged him on the flank, and great trails of creepers, all matted together, hung from his tusks as he threw his head from side to side, and ploughed out his pathway. Then Little Toomay laid himself down close next to the great neck, lest a swinging bough should sweep him to the ground, and he wished that he were back in the lines again.